Okay, so welcome back, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started with our panel, our tinyML application throwdown, and I'm just going to introduce our moderator, Chris Rowan. You will know him from his tinyML Trailblazers series, and he has a whole very distinguished technical career beyond that. He's VP of AI engineering at Cisco. But Chris, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you very much. The premise of this panel is that we've got a set of industry experts who are active practitioners in building really interesting applications across a significant range of different kinds of end uses, different kinds of data, different kinds of underlying hardware technology. And we have posed this as a kind of cage match or throwdown. We want a little bit of controversy. But in reality, we're just trying to get some insights about what drives these different applications. What drives success? What are the barriers to adoption? I think there's a widespread belief that AI will be everywhere. AI will be in all of these edge devices. But when will each kind of application reach that inflection point where it really becomes very prolific, very widely used, very much driving volume, driving silicon, driving software? When will it go from being an interesting demonstration of the potential to being something that really gets used universally? And so we have four really interesting people. They are all active speakers today. So in no particular order, we have Alessandro Grande from Edge Impulse, who gave a talk this afternoon. We have Eric Sondy, who has a poster session and is talking a lot about the ARM platform. We have Al Heshmali of TDK, who gave a talk this morning, and Nick Thama of HP, who also gave a talk this morning. And so what I want to do is pose a general question for each of you to answer. It's kind of the first softball opener to give a sense of where you're coming from in this. So what do you think are the most interesting, the most likely tinyML applications, and why are they interesting? Why are they going to happen? When are they going to happen? What is going to be the impact on the end user from the proliferation of this particular kind of technology? So, Eric, do you want to start on what's your favorite app and why?
Sure. So one of the things we see a lot of with ARM and the ARM compute subsystem based on some of our Cortex-M IP and our NPU and ISP is what we can think of as smart vision, right? And smart vision is all of the things that we might think of, like object detection, motion recognition, things like that. And why I find it so interesting and what we hear is challenging is how smart vision compute subsystems pair up with connectivity in smart home and automation, and just the broad range of segments that smart vision can reach, the broad range of devices from rich IoT endpoints that have application processors and secure roots of trust and real-time capabilities, and down to small, really lightweight, battery-powered, ultra-efficient, ultra-low power devices that are just really microcontrollers with AI. And so that breadth of device and how it translates across a breadth of markets, from smart doorbells in the home to vision systems for security, to functional safety applications in the factory for image recognition on factory lines in industry to medical devices is just so broad, and just really smart vision is really where I see just a lot of very cool development and a lot of breadth.
Great. And Alessandro, what's your favorite app and why? And why now?
So I gave a talk today about my favorite app, right? So I have to stay on track and talk about health. And I think the reason for that is, the reason why it's so interesting is because it's touching people's lives, right? And I think it's really, we have the potential in this room, like, to work on things that are actually changing people's lives and for the better, right? And improving people's lives. I usually get asked from people that are not in the technology space of, are you sure that we need more technology, right? And I think the answer to that is yes, right? Because there's a lot of people dying. I mean, we looked at diabetes earlier. One person every 5 seconds, right? And that's just diabetes, but it's just an example of, like, this is, it's a problem. People are still facing these problems, right? And we have an opportunity to solve some of these problems through technology. And I think the use of tinyML is interesting because, as I mentioned earlier, we can build devices that can be handheld, that can follow the user, across the day. A lot of these pathologies and a lot of these issues actually require, continuous monitoring, right? So really having something that can be low powered, that can be with the user across the day, across their lives, is super beneficial. And why now? Or should I answer that as well?
Sure.
Yeah. I think there is a growing, or actually, why is it interesting more than why now at this point, is because actually these are real problems, right? And the solutions that we've seen are not are not working all the time. So I think yeah, together we can do more, and I'm excited to talk about that more. I'll leave it to
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, because some of the applications that people imagine, the ML-powered toaster, the correct reaction might be, so what? How much did it improve my life? With these medical applications, the so what is easy. I had a life. And then it becomes much more, well, how did I get it done? How did I actually accomplish this goal that most people would agree is probably worthwhile? So let me turn to Al. Tell me, what's your favorite application? Why?
Favorite is a tough one. Again, TDK makes a lot of different sensors, which, outside of cameras, just about any other sensor you can think of. And so I guess that just means we get to play with a lot of different things, and in fact, really play in a lot of different markets and applications. And so again, there's my talk this morning, we talked about the proliferation of sensors in consumer electronics and lots of always-on functionality that goes on there already. But maybe today, I'll focus on industrial type applications. Again, in addition to providing sensors and a whole bunch of other components, electronic components, TDK also does a lot of the manufacturing of these things. So there's great interest in internally figuring out how we improve our manufacturing processes, and this whole notion of digital transformation, which in its depth relies heavily on sensors and making sense of the sensor data, with respect to tiny or otherwise larger AI type engines, is something that we care a lot about.
Mm-hmm. Great. So Nick, what's your favorite application and why?
I don't know if I have a favorite application, but I can probably tell you about some of the focuses in the PC industry. There's been a shift in focus in computer vision, but the biggest challenge in creating effects or video effects, right, that can help people better work in the hybrid world the challenging piece has been the power consumption, right? So there's been a huge focus, a lot of discussion around how do we optimize AI models and what type of AI compute should we add into PC architecture, right? Today we're using CPU and GPU to do a lot of the inferencing, but it's just killing the battery. And in the PC world, there's a big push in sustainability, and we're looking at several AI compute hardware to be able to have a more optimized way of running those AI models. And so that's the biggest challenge here for at least in the personal computing space.
Right. Now, one of the lovely things about the tinyML conference is that it's really at this intersection between what's going on technically and this community of people that's trying to drive commercial success. And so volume matters. Number of users matter. And so the question comes up, what are the conditions for success for a tinyML application? How do you get to scale? How do you know that the time is right? Because most of the applications we're talking about here were probably talked about in some way 4 years ago and 3 years ago and 2 years ago and last year, and we'll talk about them next year and the year after. And so, if we can shed some light on the question of what are the trigger conditions? What are the things that sort of give you a hint that you have in fact reached that inflection point where things can start to take off? So first, what are the positive indicators that you've seen about when the market is ripe, when the technology is ripe, when kind of all the planets have aligned such that you can really expect something to start to click? Anybody who wants to jump in with, what are the indicators that you're in the right spot?
I can take a shot at that. So it's a good question, and it's a hard question, right? I was talking to someone yesterday, a friend that was telling me about his device, right? And he was asking, he builds cameras. And his question was, I'm looking for a new silicon, right? A new chip. And they're trying to sell me all these chips, right? But actually, I just want a chip that I can have in my hand today, right? I want it so that I can use it tomorrow and I can build the device, right? And I think, that kind of sums up for me, like, you need to have these devices deployed, right? So it's nice and interesting when we talk about these applications, but until you see them working, right, and they're in your hands, they're not real, right? So, I'll give you an example of one of the companies that we're working with, and we have talked about it 3 years ago, right? So it's still the same application, but they've just announced, I think it was a few months ago, that they've sold 1 million pieces, right? So that's real. I mean, it's Aura, right? It's the Aura ring, and they're doing sleep tracking, like it's real, right? So that sort of stuff makes it more and more real, right? So what's an indicator of a success, right? Is having it and being able to use it. And I think in the health space, there's kind of meta level to that, and it's the fact that these things are usually hard to get FDA approved, right? And there's still challenges, and there's not really that many that have FDA approval, but we're seeing, I showed one of the graphs, if you watched talk earlier, of the number of devices that are being FDA approved with AI inside in the last few years, right? And we've gone from a handful in 2015 to over 100 every year in the last few years, right? So there's more and more devices out there with the AI inside, right? And effectively, the trend is the things are happening, right? Devices are being put out there, and they're being even FDA approved. So this proves that the technology has foundations, right? Has real meaning and can drive change. So
yeah, Eric.
Yeah, I totally agree. So seeing is believing, feeling and touching is believing, and there is a hardware component, as you're getting at. For me as a developer, it's all about the software, and it's all about the developers being able to write software, which sometimes involves the chip, but it's all about having the tools, the ecosystem, and as simple, as easy as possible. And to me, the real indicator of success is if I see my kids doing it, right? The way I saw them, 5-10 years ago, take Blockly, type low, no code, and do robotics programming. Once I see that happening, that's the scale that it's really hit, and everyone is really taking advantage of AI at the fullest potential.
Okay, so hardware is a gating item, software tools is a gating item.
So it's actually an interesting question because as we look at it again, usually we think of consumer type applications we all get to play with, and some of us like them, some don't. But when you think about somebody's factory, they're very protective of their walls and what goes on inside of them, and they're very cautious about adopting new technology. And honestly, as a community, we perhaps haven't quite spent enough time really understanding their pain points and their care-abouts. Sometimes if we have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So a lot of times we're the ones taking our technology in and saying, hey, look how great it is, we can do X, Y, or Z. In reality, that may not really be an impactful thing for that customer base. So I think there's opportunities for us with respect to industrial applications to really spend more time trying to understand their care-abouts.
Yeah. And what typically are the techniques you use when you're into these accounts that are not buying technology for technology's sake? They've got some problem, and they may even be naturally skeptical about new technology. What do you use to prove to them that this is safe and easy and robust?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm using TDK as an example. Just obviously, I'm part of the organization, although I'm not in the manufacturing areas. A lot of it boils down to really up and down, buying into the concepts, but ultimately, we will need to be able to demonstrate the ROI as to what is it really going to do for you. Are you going to improve my quality by X%? And the X doesn't have to be very high. I mean, every couple of percent of quality improvement is huge for these factories. Can you truly show me that if I was to deploy certain technology, that you're going to help me maintain my equipment uptime by a certain amount, and being able to go beyond PowerPoint and slideware and into true, economics of, what is the value proposition. And by the way, taking them out for beer after hours doesn't hurt. Building good relationships will go a long ways in terms of really getting people to want to work with you.
Yeah, right. And Nick, what do you?
Well, I mean, working at HP, I think I can only discuss this from a PC perspective or
right.
PC industry perspective, and I think I think there's three key drivers that drives a PC OEM in accepting or even looking at implementing an AI solution from a key supplier and actually put it into production. Is the number one obviously is cost, right? And the justification behind the cost. Is it what is the value proposition, right? Is it even worth it? Do our customers even want these type of AI features into the product? And so the value proposition definitely needs to justify the cost adder to the platform. And number two is differentiator, right? How do we differentiate from our other competitors? We're when looking and evaluating different key supplier solutions, we look at like the flexibility, what allows us, does the architecture allow us to implement our own machine learning models, and differentiate from the competitors. And then number three, as I mentioned, is power consumption, right? That's a huge thing for PC OEMs, especially with devices running off on battery. So power consumption has to be very ultra low. So yeah, those is my perspective there.
Yeah. One of the factors for many companies here is that they have to rely on the venture community for funding, either directly or your partners rely on it. I mean, in case of ARM, you really care about the health of the ecosystem a lot. And a technology like AI goes through hype cycles. Sometimes anything that moves in AI, people love it. Other times it's like, whoa. Right now we're not in a great VC funding cycle, so we're kind of hopefully in a trough, not a downward slope. But what's your perception of how the perception of AI affects it? I mean, Al, you sort of mentioned kind of this conservatism that's a factor. There's kind of a prove it on cost, prove it on functionality, prove it on power. What do you see out there in terms of how the public imagination or how the specific climate in your subset of the industry affects how you go to market or how you invest in different AI solutions? What does the hype cycle for AI mean for you and the solutions that you're trying to pursue? Anybody who wants to?
I'll take a stab at it.
Yeah.
Honestly, at the end of the day, I don't know that the population cares so much whether it's AI or whatever.
Yeah.
What functionality are you getting?
Right.
At the end of the day, what are you doing for me?
Yeah.
The fact that under the hood it's running AI, or not is, most of the people don't seem to care.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, show me that you can deliver value.
Right.
Whether it's an electric car or a gas combustion engine or.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes sense, particularly since you said, it's a community which is kind of skeptical about technology to start from. You're not going to go say, oh, you're going to adopt this because it's the latest thing.
Trust me, it's got AI in it.
That's not a winning story.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with you. I don't think I've seen any customers complaining about AI features, except there's only actually two things that is an exception, and that's vision-based AI and audio-based AI. I think there's been a little bit of concern from a few customers. Not all customers care about it, but some customers are really concerned about privacy. And so that's the only area that I see where there's maybe a little pushback in utilizing AI. But other than that, like in my earlier talk with SD Micro, when it comes to just maybe device motion and seeing if the PC is sitting on the desk or sitting on a user's lap, that type of AI inferencing is not very big of a concern for the customer. They like the benefit that it brings for them, so they don't care so much about how it's being implemented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think equal to the market and customer uptake and challenges to that, I think are the producers, right? And tinyML in particular has some challenges because it's the intersection of AI and ML with embedded development, right? And so embedded development is traditionally, very carefully done, conservative in many ways, boards on desks, doesn't mate well with some of the cloud native practices for training ML in the cloud.
Right.
Lots of challenges of moving AI technology down to end devices. And so we rely on that ecosystem that you mentioned and investment into that community and partnerships by Alessandro and Edge. And it's a really important part. And so as long as we have a collaborative ecosystem, I think that's the real key to overcoming the challenges of bringing AI down to the embedded edge and scaling.
Right.
Yeah, and I think I have to agree with all of you, but I wanted to kind of build on what you guys were talking about. I think it needs to solve a problem, right? So, nobody cares really about the fact that there is AI or not to a certain extent, right? As long as it solves a problem that it couldn't solve before, right? The reason why I think health is really big and why it's receiving a lot of investments from VCs actually is because the problems that are being solved are problems that couldn't be solved before, right? So I think that's a big thing. It's not just an add-on, right? Like industrial is really interesting. We're working very tightly with a few customers in industrial, but the uptake is much slower, right? Because you have to, in industrial, you're saving money, right? So someone has to buy in the vision that, in 10 years' time, they'll save X amount of money, right? It's different from saying, I can allow you from tomorrow to do something you couldn't do before, right? So I think that's the kind of that's a big difference between the health space that's accelerating much faster than the industrial space, where there's more risk adverseness in the businesses, and effectively there is more, there's less traction or a slower traction, let's say, but nonetheless traction.
Yeah. I'm curious what role in these different applications you find for regulation and compliance, especially, but not exclusively, around access to data. Data is what makes ML different from other embedded programming. And if you don't have adequate data, you got nothing. And so in different segments, you're going to have very different situations. I mean, in industrial, you're going to have very private data, very idiosyncratic, not very, publicly valuable. In health, you got health data, obviously highly sensitive data, and in different applications, sometimes in vision or audio. What is the role of data access and of regulation, including regulation around use of data, that affects the trajectory of your favorite applications? Where do you get the data? How do you have to handle that data? What do customers care about in the collection and use of data? You want to give it a try, Alessandro?
I'll give it a shot. So it's interesting. I think there's two opposite sides to this, right? We get a lot of customers that are telling us, I'm not sure I trust you, right? I don't want to share data with you. And this is people building the applications, right? So, and we're like, okay, we've got, we can deal with that, right? We've got solutions for that. So that's one end of the spectrum, right? Customers that are wanting to find a solution with data, right? But they don't want to share the data. So that's, that's interesting, right? And the other end of the spectrum is customers building medical applications that require massive amount of data, right? Of clinical data, clinical trials. So we're really seeing both, and I think again there's a big difference. I keep on seeing this separation between kind of industrial space where there is more risk adverseness, right? And it kind of correlates, right? So in the industrial space there's less. It's harder to get people to share their data, right? Because for whatever reason, they're less inclined to share data, because most likely they can do some of the stuff that we or others can enable in a different way, right? Versus when someone is trying to build something completely new, right? They know they have to share data with someone, right? And there it becomes more of a question of what are how you deal with data, right? And how, what can you guarantee, right? What are the guarantees around data sharing? Because we all know that you have to share data with someone, right? It could be AWS, it could be Google, it could be, right? Someone will have to store that data somewhere and then allow you to deal with that data, right? So it's not a question of whether you want to share the data; it's a question of who do you share it with, right? And yeah.
And I think a lot of that speaks to data privacy and data sharing. I think another aspect to think of is cybersecurity and secure devices, especially IoT devices. So that's often a concern. That's an aspect of the architecture, ARM's architecture, that we're investing in, always investing in. It's an aspect of the microarchitecture and features of the software ecosystem, standardization, secure boot, trust, so that the devices that the IoT economies and AI are built on are secure fundamentally and maintain some cybersecurity.
Thoughts on data?
Yeah, again, industrial applications, they're very protective of their data, and they're certainly, that's one of their value propositions as they see their secret sauce of how they run their manufacturing lines. And by the way, it turns out that factories are very dynamic environments, and so very different behaviors that you'll see going from one factory or another to another, even with the same set of equipment. And so again, a lot of us look at vibration monitoring as a way of monitoring equipment health. But again, these are the early days where literally you got to find yourself a nice, clean environment where there aren't any other environmental effects to be able to really isolate specific piece of equipment. And so, again, as a community, I think there's opportunities for figuring out how to make these solutions more robust, and more immune to a lot of the environmental differences in various different applications, which could potentially help you with some of the robustness events that you want to get by having much broader set of data. But again, as it is, hard to see how these factories are going to open up their data pipes to the community.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm the best person to talk about machine learning data, but what I've seen at least in the tech industry is transparency is like one of the pushes, right? Like when it comes to like collecting data of end users, there's things in place within each company to make sure that we are notifying the end user of any sorts of like telemetry data or data collection. I think even Windows PCs, right, they have all these notifications before you even start setting up your PC regarding your data being collected and all these privacy statements and such. And so HP is also has these notifications, right, for any type of data collection that we do or telemetry data that we collect within our PCs. Those things are being transparent to the end user that we are collecting that data, and they have the option to opt out as well. So.
Yeah, you raise an interesting question, because one of the things that appears to vary a lot from application to application is this spectrum between, on one hand, I collected all the data beforehand from other sources, I trained a model, and then everybody gets the same model. And at the other end of the spectrum, I am training in situ on the data of this particular instance. I mean, this happens a lot in predictive maintenance, anomaly detection in industrial, for example. And somewhere in between you have this, well, the model is generally trained independently, except there's a registration process for my voice or my face that's used as some kind of identity or configuration. But it's a small fraction of the total data in the system. What do you find in your experience, in medical or in smart vision or in industrial, in the role of kind of conventional pre-training, it's all done in the cloud, I found the data over here, and that's completely isolated from the data which is flowing through the system, versus something where there's a big role for, unsupervised learning, pattern learning at the edge in the device. What do you see?
So I think there's two different aspects to this, right? Great question. On one end, everybody would like to be able to train their models and optimize them and change them based on their data coming in, right? That the model has never seen before, right? And this, it can be done, right? But it's got challenges. I mean, the main challenge is if you don't know what the data is, right? For example, let's take industrial as an example. If you're putting a sensor on a machine that you think is working correctly, and actually it is not, right? And you're training it again to adapt it and potentially improve its performance. If there's an anomaly in that machine, you're just taught the model to learn and to understand that that's actually normality, right? So unsupervised training is very dangerous unless you've got a way of checking what the data, what other data you're feeding into the system, right? So,
right.
So that's, yeah,
right.
I'm going to leave it there.
Yeah.
So I haven't talked about medical, but.
So,
Yeah,
maybe
pre-trained
I'll
versus
chime
in
in.
situ training.
So one of the big challenges with industrial applications, honestly, it's a very fragmented market. There's just no one solution that's going to hit 50% of the industrial applications. One of the other challenges is that, again, today the solutions being rolled out are not self-robust. Again, a good example of, you trained it on a machine that had some hiccup in itself, and all of a sudden, all the future observations are incorrect. There needs to be more robustness into these solutions before they get wide deployment. Some of the ways in which we would get there by, again, truly understanding the problems in more depth than just one-off, let's go collect some data and then go from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the classic example being, I did all this self-training during the winter, and then summer came, and everything's an anomaly all of a sudden. Yeah. Start thinking about questions that you want to ask. We've got I guess we don't have microphones out there. We stole the microphones, but come up anyway with your questions, and we'll add those to the mix. Okay, here's kind of a nice abstract question that if you had a magic wand and could change one thing about the technology or the environment that would boost your effectiveness, your rate of growth, the stickiness of your solutions, what is that one thing you would change with a magic wand?
That's a tough one. I think if there was a silver bullet, it would be a nice, clear, easy definition and alignment on what are the non-differentiating aspects. I think of it from a software, but also hardware point of view when it comes to ML and AI and system design and software development that we should standardize, and
right.
Agreement and alignment to standardize so that we could really accelerate collaboration.
So all the effort went on to the value-added stuff above.
Exactly. If there was real consensus on what are the fragmenting aspects that we should just standardize and get that silver bullet in place for both hardware and software design.
Okay,
So
that's good.
It's a broad answer.
Yeah, sure.
It's a tough question.
So I go for data literacy. I think if I could just have everyone understand how to deal with data and how to build good data sets, that would make my life much easier. And I think we would see way more applications out there. So I go with that.
Okay. Any magic wand wishes over here?
I like data literacy, but again, that may or may not apply to all applications. But yeah, I mean, that's, open access to good source data would be a great place to start.
Still trying to think how to answer this question. I think if we just got rid of the, to me what's, when you ask that question, to me what stands out is the ecosystem issues in the PC industry, right? Because we have a lot of partners trying to bring up sometimes the same or similar AI features into the product, and so you've got all these OEMs or partners trying to fight each other in terms of having their unique, let's say for example, I think everybody has used Zoom before, right? So, for example, background blur, right, is a special video effect that's using some type of AI algorithm, and a lot of companies view background blur differently. Like they want the experience to look more unique to what they want to put out to the customers. However, you've got Zoom, and then you've got the OS, And all these players trying to enable the same exact feature or same exact video effect, and it's just creating a lot of chaos and confusion to the end user because they don't know, they start enabling background blur on Zoom, and then there's another application software that has its own background blur, and it just becomes very chaotic, right? And so
You're running a snap camera that's an
Right.
input, and you changed
Exactly.
it there. And
so I think if we can solve the whole, if I had a magic wand and we can just solve the whole ecosystem issue, that would be a lot easier
Yeah.
to get a lot of these AI features out and more easily.
Yeah. Do we have questions here? Yeah, please. Just be really loud. Sure. Oh, we got a microphone. All right. Thanks.
Thank you for your very engaging conversation. I appreciate it. One thing that I'm curious about, when you've talked about all these other different constraints and challenges, algorithmic bias didn't come up. So I'm curious how each of your different companies are engaging with addressing this with customers and so on.
Okay. So the question is, how are you engaging with the question of algorithmic bias, which is often data bias in ML, in your favorite application?
Yeah, it may be less applicable to industrial applications. The machines don't seem to care so much that you alienate them in some ways. Again, at the end of the day, what the factory manager cares about is, are you providing the specific service that you signed up to? But again, maybe there's a lot more to it than in medical or other applications.
Yeah, it's a very good question, right? And fortunately, being a tool, right, a tool company, we're not building our own applications, right? So we rely on the customer effectively not introducing data biases. Now, that's, I don't want to kind of escape the question like that. So two things that come to mind. One is effectively, we're building tools to improve or to at least have a way of measuring, right? Some of the biases, again, there's a lot of biases that you can introduce, but that's definitely one aspect to kind of help guide that. And that's why I said, data literacy, because actually a lot of the work that we do is guiding users to understand how to build a good data set, right? And how to not introduce biases. So there is some, standard approaches, and unfortunately a lot of people out there, because it's a new market, don't actually have the knowledge, right? So a lot of it is actually educational.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems to fall into the category of data literacy, adjacent to it anyway, right?
Yeah.
But I am going to totally bow out of being very far removed from the application developer and data bias in my role. Although there are a couple of people from the ML ecosystem that support the ML ecosystem at ARM that are here that I'm going to direct that question to, and we can meet up later and ask them, because I'm sure they would have a perspective from what they've heard from customers.
Yeah. Companies, in my case like Cisco, I'm sure HP, have standards for responsible AI and requirements as part of releasing products that the ML has been shown to be free of bias in various ways. But a lot of that comes back to the tools which are used in the assessment of it. And so I think that the tools used for characterizing data sets and for being able to establish whether or not there really is sufficient diversity in the data sets is not just an end user question. It's going to ultimately come back to the whole development flow, because it's just another end product capability which can and should be checked along the way to release and upgrade of it.
Yeah, it's a methodology issue.
Yeah,
It
right.
goes probably even right down to the hardware.
Right.
at some level.
All right, we got just a minute, 2 minutes left. So this is kind of a rapid fire answer for any of you who want to answer. Suppose you get invited to the same panel 3 years from now. What are you going to be saying that's different? What are you going to be saying that's the same 3 years from now? How do you think things are going to change over the course of 3 years?
I think we're going to be surprised by the rate of change. Just like there was a presentation earlier showing, I think the opening presentation showed just how the forecast for tinyML devices was off by like 50%.
Yeah.
Right, and within a year of the forecast or something like that. So
Right.
I think that is going to continue, and we'll be just surprised.
So
by
we'll
the
be richer
pervasiveness
3 years from now.
And breadth of adoption and where we see tinyML show up.
Great.
That's
Okay. Alessandro?
So really quick, what I want to say different is that I don't want to speak about tinyML anymore in 3 years, right? I want everything to have ML inside, so we don't have to tell people about it. On the other hand, what I think is going to be still the same is that we'll still have to teach people how to use data in a proper way, right? So that's probably going to be still there.
Yeah. Al?
So I hope that as a community we would have figured out how to provide a repeatable business model with respect to the digital transformation and industrial applications. As it is today, we're doing a lot of one-off custom solutions. I hope we can figure out a way in which we can scale that much more quickly across a larger body of applications in that space.
Great.
I think
Nick, the last word.
Yeah, I think 3 years from now, I am a believer of tinyML, and I think it's going to scale on more, laptop products and desktop products as well. Right now, it's more of a premium play. It's usually AI or tinyML type of features are launched on like elite or premium products. But I think 3 years from now, I think we're going to start seeing more like low-end products incorporating AI. But I think there's probably going to be a lot more regulation. 3 years from now, there's already been some discussions around FCC guidance in terms of the data bias. That's today was kind of, engineers were not really thinking about some of the data biases, but until we started advertising AI into our product, then we got flagged by our PR teams regarding the training data sets and all that stuff. So I think 3 years from now, there's going to be a lot more push to regulate data for in the PC world. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much. And thank you, Eric, Al, Alessandro, Eric. It was great.